We are in the third book, Vayikra, Leviticus. We continue learning about offerings on the altar. Chapter 4, verse 27. Okay, we got several verses without any Rashis. Let's get right into it. The im nefesh achas, and if a one soul, meaning one person, right, an individual, techta. We spoke previously about a communal sin. We spoke about the Kohen Gadol and the high priest and his sin. Now we're speaking about one person. They did a sin, and what we learned. Oh, we're gonna learn right now. So we did a bishgaga unintentionally. Mi'am ha'aretz, from the people of the land. Ba'aseisa achas mitzvahs. In doing, this person did, in doing mitzvahs Hashem, from God's commands, asher lo yisasena, you're not supposed to do. Meaning, what does that mean you're not supposed to do? It's a prohibition. What is that? 365 commandments that you're not allowed to do. Like he ate some unkosher fats, right? Or he profaned the Shabbos and so on. Va'ashen, and he becomes guilty. Ay haida, continuing in 28. Ay haida, or became known to him, elav to him, chatasa, his sin, asher chata, that he sinned. Vehevi karbonai, then he has to bring his offering, his sacrifice. Seiras izim, it is a Seiras izim is a she goat. Right, nekeva, tmima, unblemished, pure. Nekeva, it is a female. Al chatase, on his sin, asher chata, that he sinned. V'samach his yadei, and he will lean his hands al reish, on the head, hachatas, of the sin offering. V'shachat is hachatas, and he will slaughter the sin offering, b'makom ha'olah, in the place where the oila offering is, which is in the north. We've learned all this stuff before. It's just right, which is in the north side of. This is the north side over here. Actually, yeah. Oops, upside down. The north side over here, or over here. This in the Beis Hamikdash, right? 1 second. Okay, let it please, Liba. Okay. Continuing. So we just finished 29. Verse 30. V'lakach, and shall take a kohen, the kohen shall take midama. Again, this is following the same pattern, right? The slaughter could be done by the owner of the offering. But now when it comes to the blood and bringing it to the altar, now the kohen gets involved. It's his duties. He will take from the blood be'etzboi, with his finger, and he will place it on the corners of the altar, ha'oila, the ascent, which is the outer altar, right? That's called dama, and all of its blood, after you put it on the corners, all of its blood, yishbech, it should be poured to the base of the altar. Okay, no Rashis on these. Now we go to 31. That's called chelba, and all of its fats, yosir, it should be removed, kasher husar, as it was removed, chelev, the fats, mi'al zevach hashlamim, for the peace offering, Vayikra hakoyin, and the koyin should have it smoked up on mizbecha on the altar. The reich nichayach laHashem, that is a pleasing fragrance to Hashem. The chiper Allah, and it will be an atonement for him. Hakoyin, the koyin will bring the atonement. In other words, right? B'nisach, and he will be forgiven. Rashi says, Kasher husar chela me'al zebach hashamim, in the same way that you remove the fat on the sacrifice of the peace offering, the emure'ez, like the specified parts of the goat, right? In other words, the goat, you don't offer its tail on the altar. More mishlamim, that which was mentioned concerning the peace offering, which was in chapter 3, verses 14, 15. They're similar. Okay. 32. Vim keves yavi karbonai. Now, if he's going to bring from sheep, he's going to bring his sacrifice, l'chatas for a chatas, nekeva tmima diyaviena. It should be a female that you bring, right? Remember, we learned this Sunday about, right? That chatas is female and asham is male, right? We hold class on that.
Why doesn't it say kifsa? Why kevis?
Good question. Kevis is male form and kifsa is female form. Good question. I don't know. I don't have an answer. Okay. So, if you're bringing a sheep, as opposed to what we just spoke about, a goat, right? One second. Sir Izim is a goat, a she-goat, a female goat. But if you're bringing from sheep, then it's also female. Keva, Tamima, it has to be unblemished. Yiviena, you should bring. 33, V'samach is yada, and he shall place his hands al resh chatas, on the head of the chatas, lean his hands there, V'shachad isa, and then he shall slaughter it, l'chatas, for the sake of being a chatas, a sin offering, b'makom asher yishchad es oila, in the place where he slaughters the oila offering, again in the northern part. Rashi in 33, V'shachad isa l'chatas, and he shall slaughter it for a sin offering, shetei shchitasa, that its slaughtering should be l'shem chatas, for the sake of a sin offering. Right? In other words, what is it saying that you should? It's saying the word slaughter it for a chatos. I mean, the whole thing is speaking about a chatos. Why do you have to say slaughter it for a chatos? Because you have to be mindful that you're doing for that. If you're mindful, let's say you have a bunch of sacrifices you're bringing. It's holiday time and you're coming, right? And you have a shlomim that you're bringing, a peace offering you're bringing because it's a holiday, right? And you have also sin offering because you're obligated to bring a sin offering. You did something unintentional, right? And let's say you got confused and you brought this one thinking that it's the peace offering. It's invalid. Right? How do we know? Because the verse just said, right? The verse just said that when you slaughter it, you have to have in mind when you're slaughtering it that it is lachatos. It is for the sake of a chatos, for the sin offering. That's clear? Yeah?
Amen.
Yeah? Okay. Amazing. Okay. 34. And the kohen shall take midam achatas, from the blood of the sin offering, with his finger, and he shall put it on to the corners of the altar of the ascent, which refers to where sacrifice is brought, right? The outer altar, right? Not the one that that's in the holies, that is brought for incense. Ve'es kol dama, and all of its blood, yishbach, he shall spill on the Yisod HaMizbeach to foundation, the base of the altar. 35. Verse 35. That's called chelba. On all of its fats, yosir, you should remove. Kasher yusar, as it was removed. Chelav akesib.
Akevis. Oh.
Akesib, no.
Yeah.
Kesib, right? As it was removed for the interesting. What are we talking about over here? Yeah, so when you take off from the kesef, the sheep, mizevach hashlamim, that of the peace offering, v'hikter akayin, and the kohen shall smoke it oisam them hamizbecha on the altar, al ishe Hashem, on the fire of God, the chipar alav, and it will the kohen will bring atonement for the person who brought the sin offering, al chatase, over his sin, asher chata, that he sinned, v'nislach loy, and he will be forgiven. Okay. So Rashi, keskasher yusar chelav hakesiv, that the fat of the sheep would be removed, shenisrabu emura, for this specified parts of the peace offering were increased over those of the goat. Why? Balya, by the fat of the tail. Right? When you bring a goat, the goat doesn't have a tail. The sheep does. So by the sheep, you bring the tail, right? So it says here, the fat of the sheep would be removed, meaning, so the verse is coming to tell us that there's something more to remove, and that is the tail. Avchatas, so with regard to the sin offering, kishiba b'kisba, when it's coming from a ewe, a sheep, a female sheep, to una alya imayemorim. So it requires the fat of the tail to be part of the offering. When the words ka'asher, as the fat that you would remove from the sheep, what does it mean? What does it mean as the fats? What was as the fats?
Just like.
Right, just like, which means you're comparing it to something. What are you comparing it to? We've been comparing it to the peace offering. Just like the peace offering, you take off the fat of the tail, right? Or the tail. So likewise, over here, you do the same thing. That's what those words mean, right? Okay, next Rashi, Alish Hashem, on the fire of God. What does that mean? It's interesting. Let's see before. Because before we didn't say the fire. Look in verse 31. In verse 31, right, they should smoke it on the chipah. It doesn't say Ishe Hashem. It doesn't say the fire of God. Here it does. So Rashi picks up on it. Al Maduras Eish means on the pyres of the fire. There were several piles of wood that were on fire on the altar. Hasuyas Lashem, that were made for the sake of heaven. Al Ish Hashem. In Old French, folets. Okay. In other words, that's real Old French. On the fires of God. That's plural, right? So Rashi's saying because there are several fires on the altar, and all of them had to be done for the sake of God. In other words, meaning you had to be mindful when you made the fire, that this is a fire for Hashem. That's what Rashi's coming to say. Okay? We continue now in chapter 5, verse 1. Nefesh, a person. Again, nefesh means soul, right? The lowest level of the soul. Nefesh, ruach, neshama, chay, yechida. So nefesh, kisechta, when it will do a sin, v'sham, Allah, and it will hear the sound of an oath. V'hu eid, and he is a witness. Oira, or he saw. Oyada, or he knows. Im lo yagid, and he doesn't say. V'nasa avaynai, he will bear his sin. Okay, what is this talking about? Let's see Rashi. Rashi explains in verse 1. The Shamal Allah, and he's going to hear the sound of an oath. B'davashu eid boy. This is talking about something that he's a witness to, right? He heard the sound of an oath. Means shehishbiu shvua, that they administered an oath to this person, right? She'im yadea lo'edus, and therefore he knows testimony that he could favor a litigant. She'yoid loy, that he should testify on his behalf of the litigant. Right? There's a monetary dispute, for example, right? And he could now testify. He knows. I was there when they made the contract. I know, this is da, right? And he could testify. So he lies or he says something. Want to bring another chumash? Please. We're in verse 1 in chapter 5. Just a reminder, the learning is where today is the yard site, 126th yard site of the Rebbe Rasha. And yesterday was 126 years ago he passed away. And 102 years ago was born a soul that just passed away. His name is Wolf, the son of Moshe Mendel, a very special individual. And his son-in-law is here to join us. In his merit, we learn. The merit of Beis Nisan. Okay. So this person could give testimony, right, for in a case, a litigation, and he doesn't, right? He's obligated to come and bear testimony. If you know testimony for something, right, litigation between two people, and you could give to a litigant testimony, and you don't. So this is what the verse is talking about, right? Either you say I don't know, or whatever the case may be, right? That's swearing falsely that you do have testimony. We're not talking about false. We're not talking about even saying it falsely, right? You're not giving the testimony. That's what we're talking about over here. Okay? Clear? Yes. And subsequently, he admits he lied. I did, it went through the court, and he didn't give his testimony, so the judgment was made, and then he comes clean. He says, I had testimony and I did, right? So this is what the offering, this is now he has to bring a sacrifice for that, right? That's what we're talking about. Let's go to verse number 2. Oy nefesh asher tiga. Or we're talking about, right? These are now different categories of things that a person could have done, or a person asher tiga, that he touched b'chol davar tameh, in any impure object, oy benivlas chaya, or a carcass of an impure beast, tameya, that's impure, oy benivlas behema tameya, or a carcass of an impure animal, that's not a beast, right? Oy benivlas sheretz, or a impure creepy crawler, tameh, benela mimenu, and it was concealed from him. V'hu tameh v'ashem, and he is impure and became guilty. Let's see Rashi. Number 2. Yeah, Rashi in verse number 2. Oy nefesh asher tiga, or a person that touched, hatuma hazu, after this impurity, yechol kochim, he went and ate kochim. In other words, the verse is talking about like this. There's no problem that a person touches a carcass of an animal. You became impure. Okay. So you purify yourself afterwards, right? We're talking times of the holy temple, right? You needed to be pure to come to the holy temple and bring an offering. So, but you touched the carcass, you became impure, and now you came to the holy temple in a state of impurity. That's the problem. Yes, Ezekiel.
So, what does the word creepy crawler refer to exactly? Like bugs or?
Not bugs, like rodents,
Okay.
right? A rodent is not an animal. It's not a beast.
Okay.
It's its own category.
Like rats.
Like rats, right? Exactly.
So it's a spiritually, the verse 2 is the carcass of any spiritually defiled animal. So what is the spiritually defiled animal? Is it because it's a carcass that is...
Because it's carcass, therefore, because it's dead, Torah says it's impure. You touched it, you became impure. You need to go to the mikvah. And what it just means, you need to go to the mikvah, and that night you'll be already pure. But you didn't know this. You didn't realize that you touched the carcass. And then you went to the Beit HaMikdash, right? And you brought an offering in a state of impurity. And then you realize, oh my gosh, what did I do? You just realized that you came into contact with an impure animal, a carcass of an animal, and you were impure. You didn't go to the mikvah, right? And you brought that offering. So that's what we're talking about. For that, you need to bring an offering.
It's interesting because when the animal is killed, then it becomes an offering for the sacrifice.
Yeah, but it's slaughtered. It's not a carcass. That's all called a carcass.
It means like it was
That's not
dead.
It was dead in the field. It was dead in the field.
Slaughtered is not.
Yeah, slaughtered is not called a carcass. Exactly. Not yeah, exactly. So then the person went and ate something holy in the temple. Or she comes to the mikdash, or he actually entered in the base of mikdash. And this, if you intentionally did this, right? We're talking about a person who did not intentionally do this. Because if you intentionally did it, you would have an early demise from the hands of heaven. You would die an early death. And this in times the holy temple, right? Now it's a whole different story because we don't have all this process. Right? Is that clear? But this is how it's explained in the Talmud. Benela mimenu, and it was concealed from him. Matuma, the impurity was concealed from him. Va'ashem, he becomes guilty. Ashem means guilty. Be'achilas kaidish, in that sacred thing that he ate, or be'bias hamikdash, or entering into the holy temple, or the Mishkan in the desert was the Mishkan, right? So that's a second example, right? Where it's a run-on sentence over here. Now we go to the third one, right? First one was you had testimony and you didn't give that testimony. You were supposed to, right? But you did it, right? You didn't give the testimony. Second one is you became impure. Now the third one. Or ki yiga b'tumas adam, you actually touched a human being. The whole tumasai that was impure, ashit maba, that he became impure through it, and it was also hidden from you. Yada, and then you know about it. V'ashem, and you are guilty. So let's go to verse number 3 in Rashi. A lot of Rashi over here. Tumas adam, human impurities, utumas mesa means you went into the hospital, right? You went into the hospital, which is okay, you can go into the hospital. But the problem afterwards, you have to become purified from it in order to come to the holy temple, right? You're allowed to be in a state of impurity. Aside from a kohen, that's a bit of a more tricky thing. A kohen for 7 relatives can become impure, right? Otherwise, you cannot go to the cemetery, right? So that's why a kohen doesn't go to the cemetery. But here we're talking about a regular person can become impure. You became impure, but you didn't realize it. Either you forgot it, you didn't realize it, and then you went to the holy temple and you brought an offering in a state of impurity.
And a
right?
Kohen Gadol cannot become
Yeah, that's a whole different level. Yeah, exactly. The whole to masay to all manners of impurity. Larabas to mazmaga zavim bezavos is to include the impurity of touching a zav and a zavis, which is a unique kind of impurity of a person. That's a person who's not a dead person, right? But it's also an impurity. Asher yitma, that he will make impure l'rabas and give a bayal nida, that someone who had relations with a nida and you touch that person. All these words are superfluous words that our sages learn out from it, that it means something more to include. Remember, I remember, Torah is written in shorthand. The oral Torah, which is Rashi, is elongating the shorthand. Because when we read it, here we should say, Asher Yitma. Why do you have to say that you became impure? We're talking about you're impure. What do you mean that you became impure? It's coming to include something, right? So Rashi is explaining, what is it coming to include over here? I mean, so you touched another person who had relations with his wife who was in a state of nida. Includes that. Okay? But through it, that's another thing. This includes someone who swallows meat of a carcass of a pure bird. It's a kosher species, but it wasn't properly slaughtered. Right? And became concealed. That means he didn't know, but that he forgot about the impurity. It happened to him a month ago, or even it was last week. Forgot about it completely. And now the holiday's coming, and he's coming up to the Holy Temple, and completely forgot about it and did not go through the state of purification. So he's guilty for that, right? Why are you guilty? For not being aware. Awareness is what is unique about being human. Animals don't have self-awareness. They just are, right? So there's self-awareness is what makes us human. And when you're not aware, right? We excuse ourselves. I excuse myself when I'm not aware of something, right? In the end, it's not an excuse.
Were there any sacrifices that were in case you did something wrong and you didn't know?
Well, I mean, that will come. Yeah, that's Osham Toli. So that's coming. Not now. Not now. That's something else. Yes, but there is. So, Osham, so he's guilty in eating something sacred, or mikdash, or for entering into the holy temple. Okay. Yes, you had another question? Yeah, so everybody prepared themselves that way, but what happens if you didn't? You're right, everybody did. Yeah. Last week we read from Parsha, what was called Parsha Para. No, 2 weeks ago. Last week was a Chodesh, right? Parsha Para. What's Para? Para Aduma, the red heifer. What's the red heifer? For purifying you from, you came in contact with a human being that passed away. You went to the hospital, right? Someone passed away. Right? You're in the same room as them, or in the same domain. You become impure. You need the red heifer purification when you come in contact with it, right? When it's a rodent or an animal, you just have to go to the mikvah. But a human being is a much more severe, obviously, the loss of that life and the impurity that imparts. And therefore, it's the red heifer. You get sprinkled by the ash from the ashes and the water, the living waters. The third day and the seventh day, and then you go to the mikvah on the seventh day. Right? It's a much more involved process. That's why we read it before Pesach, because that's what people had to do in the preparation. Because on the Pesach, they had to go up to the Holy Temple to eat from the Korban Pesach, from the Paschal Lamb offering, right? And celebration there. So that's why we read it exactly. Okay, we continue, verse number 4. Okay, we're good so far? Following? Okay. This is fascinating. This is life. This is alive. Yeah. Okay, verse number 4. Oi, now, this is a fourth thing, right? Oi nefesh, or a nefesh as a person, ki tishova levate, who swears levate sefasayim, to express his lips, meaning he verbalized, right? Lahara, to do harm, or lahetiv, or to do good. L'chol asher yivata adam, anything that a person will express. So vata means express, ha'adam, the person, bishavua, with an oath, v'nela mimenu, and he was concealed from him. He forgot. He swore to do something, and he forgot to do, right? And then all of a sudden you remembered. V'asham, he's guilty. La'achas me'ela, from one of these. One of these, what is it, regarding one of these matters. Okay, let's see Rashi. A lot of things here too, right? What's going on? So he says, look at this. Bisafasayim. Why does the verse say with your lips? You made an oath because v'loy b'lev, but not in your heart. In other words, if in your heart you resolve to do something, then we're not talking about that. You have to verbalize it. You have to verbalize it. Otherwise, dvarim shebalev ein dvarim. The Talmud says, from here we learn things in the heart are meaningless. That which you verbalize is meaningful in this instance, right? That makes you obligated, right? Obligated. You said it in your heart, you're not obligated. It doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but you're not obligated, right?
Is this the idea also why we daven with
That's why we have to verbalize, right? Exactly. Lahara, to do harm. Latzbay, to himself. Not certain what that means, to do harm to yourself. Or laheti, but to do good. Latzbay, to himself. Keep going, for example, here gives an example. I will eat, or I will not eat. Ishan, I will sleep, Ishan, I will not sleep. It's interesting. So Rashi is saying over here, you took an oath. If it's to do harm to another, we're not talking about that, right? You don't bring a guilt offering for that. If he doesn't fulfill the oath to do harm to others, right? Such an oath, because such an oath is not binding. You can't take an oath to do harm to somebody. That's not a binding oath, right? But you do bring, if you're going to do harm to yourself, but I'm not exactly clear. To do good to himself is merely... Okay. Still I need to understand that. Okay. So, others, let's say, you swear that I'm never going to eat sugar again, right? That's what we're talking about. I'm not going to have sugar again. Or you swear that I'm always going to have, lunch will be my main meal. Right? I'm not going to, right? This is what I'm going to eat, right? That kind of example, right? Anything that the person will express, or rabbi, so what is it saying? Well, what is this adding? Remember, we just said now that you expressed it. So Rashi says, to include which is in the past. In other words, to do harm or to do good. Harm, I guess, means over here that I don't know if it means harm. Harm doesn't mean true harm. If I'm saying I'm taking an oath, I'm not going to drink a Coca-Cola again, right? If you make that oath, right? That's what it means. Harm means that's helpful to you, right? Not to drink a Coca-Cola, but harm means that you're holding back something from yourself. Right, that's the idea of harm. I think that's what it means. It doesn't mean because you're not allowed to harm yourself either. What I'm going to say, I'm gonna slit my wrist. God forbid, you're not allowed to do that, right? Or to harm meaning to hold back something from you, like a Coke, like sugar or Coke, right? I think that's what it means, huh?
It's good. It's not
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, you're right. That's what I'm explaining. Harm in this instance means to hold back something from you. You enjoy it. You're addicted to it, right? So for you, it's a pleasure. Now so in a sense you're right. In the long term, it's going to be good for you. But in the short term, why are you making the oath? Because I'm such an addiction to sweets that I'm making that oath. I feel that the harm. I feel the pain. You're going to feel pain for that, right? Of course, in the end, it's good for you, but that's the context that we're talking about, right? You made that oath, right? So now, l'chol asher yivata, anything that your person will express that includes something of the past. In others, here, the first instance is in the future that I take upon myself, I'm not going to have any, and then you cross, and then you did have, right? You didn't listen to your oath, and then anything of the past, an oath about the past. Okay. Nela mimeno, and it was concealed from him. Va'avar al shvasei. What does it mean? He transgressed his oath. Kol leila, all of these oaths are included. Bekorban oila v'yored. They have an obligation of what's called an ascending and descending offering. Kimfurish kan, as will be explicit over here in verse 13. Right, we're not there yet. But an oath where a person that involves denial of money in a financial claim. In other words, I take an oath, I don't owe you money, right? You come to me and you say you owe me money, and I say no, I don't owe you money under oath, right? We're not talking about that. This is not this obligation, but rather that's a guilt offering, right? That's a guilt offering.
You know, what constitutes an oath? What becomes? I think an oath, if I'm not, it's not just like, oh, I promise, and it really has to.
You have
be
to
a
learn.
formal...
You have to. That's a Rambam. That's not for now. We're not going to go off on that. That's a good question. Excellent question.
I think that
But
has to be involved.
there has to be a negative in the pot. Yeah, I will not eat any sugar from now on. I am and that the negative, and then I am taking upon myself to how would you say that?
Well,
Anyways, whatever. I'm not gonna. I have to think about it. I don't recall the details now, but yes, there is a manner on how you take an oath. Yes, there is a manner. Yeah. Okay, but that's a different verse, different time. Verse number 5, Vahaya, and it will be Yesham, that you will be guilty lachas meila from one of these that we just mentioned, 4 different things, Vizvada, and then it becomes known, Asher chata, that you sinned, Aleha, upon it. Then you shall bring in verse number 6 your guilt offering la Hashem, to God, al chatasa, over his sin, asher chata, that which he sinned, nekeva minatzain, you give a female sheep, kisba, oy seiras izim, or a seiras izim, you bring from that's from a sheep, and this is from a goat, lechatas, for the sin, the chipar alav, and then he will be atoned, hakayin, through the kayin, michatasa, from his sin. Verse number 7, the im loisagia yadai. But if he doesn't have the means, tagia yadai means his hands doesn't reach. In other words, you reach in the pocket, oh, I don't have the money for this. I can't bring a sheep. I can't bring a goat. I don't have the money for that. They say it's sufficient a sheep, vehevi is ashamai, and he will bring his guilt offering, a shechata, shtei sa'irim. Then you could bring 2 turtle doves, which is less expensive than a sheep or a goat, right? Or shnei b'nei yoina, or 2 young doves, la Hashem, for Hashem, echad l'chatas, 1 for the sin offering, ve'echad la'ila, and 1 for the oila burnt offering. Verse number 8, ve'hevi oyisam el ha'kohen, and you should bring these offerings to the kohen, v'hikri be'ez asher l'chatas, and the kohen will offer that which is for the chatas, the sin offering, Rishona, first. Malak is Reishay, and he will do Malika, which we learned previously, right? Slaughter its head, Mimul Arpoi, from its nape, the back of the neck, V'lo Yavdil, and will not separate. Let's see, Rashi, and number 8.
does it with a nail.
Yeah, does it with a nail, exactly. Verse number 8 in Rashi, and he shall offer first the one that is for the sin offering. Chatas keidemes la'ila. The sin offering precedes the oila offering. The oila means it's completely burnt on the altar, as opposed to the sin offering. Part of it is eaten by the kohani. Lema davar daimen. What is this comparable to? Leperaklit, to an advocate. Shenichnas l'ratzis, who enters before the king to placate the king on behalf of someone he's representing. Right? Someone sinned to the king, and now he gets someone to be his advocate in front of the king. Right? So this person representing him goes to in front of the king. Once the advocate has placated the king, then the gift comes afterwards. Right? You don't bring a gift first. First, you get the king to be placated. Then you give him a gift. So first you placate. How's that? By bringing the sin offering, and then you give the gift afterwards. The gift is the oila, is the offering that is completely consumed on the altar. Is that clear? But he should not separate it. He only does malika on one sign, on the trachea or the windpipe or the food pipe. Not clear on that. Why? For the sin offering, he only one of the pipes, not both. Oirif means mimul arpahu geiva hareish. It's the high part of the head. Hamashpeya litzada tzavar, that slopes towards the neck. Mimul oirif, translated at the nape. Mul hareya is oirif. It's that which faces the back of the head. Hu oirif kol achere hatzavar. It's the length of the entire back of the neck. Yeah, the nape is over here, right? And the back will be here. Okay, verse number 9. We're almost going. Yeah, we're going to finish this in a few moments. Got a couple more verses. Vihiza, and he shall sprinkle, the kohen now shall sprinkle midam achatas, from the blood of the sin offering, al kira mizbeach, on the wall of the altar, vanishar badam, and that which is remaining of the blood, yimatze al yisoid hamizbeach, he shall squeeze it to the foundation of the altar. Chatasu, this is a sin offering. Rashi, number 9. So he picks up v'hiza midan achatas, that he sprinkles from the blood of the sin offering. Va'ela lahitin ela motzui. Concerning the oila offering, which comes afterwards, he only squeezes out. But when it comes to the sin offering, hazah mitzui, the Torah requires both sprinkling and squeezing out the blood from the bird. Eiches ba'if, he holds the bird, umatis, and sprinkles it. Ba'adam nitaz v'ahilach lemizbeach, and the blood gets sprinkled towards the altar. Chatasu, it's a sin offering. Lishmak sher. Why does he have to say it's a sin offering? Oh, well, the whole thing we're talking about is a sin offering. Why does he have to repeat that, the verse? So Rashi explains, Lishmak sher, that you have to do it for the sake. In other words, remember, people are coming now for the holiday, right? They're bringing a holiday offering. They're bringing, if they did a sin offering, like in this instance, or in these instances over here, they can bring several different things. Holiday time, right? Yeah, actually, there's several. You have to bring a holiday offering, korban chagiga, right? That's the egg on the Seder plate, right? The egg on the Seder is a korban chagiga, right? The bone, the neck of the chicken, that's the Paschal lamb offering, right? That's different offerings that you're bringing. Now but here you're bringing a personal offering because of something that you did, a sin, right? That you forgot, that you were impure, and so on and so forth. Last holiday you came and you were impure. Now you're bringing a sacrifice for that. So it could get mixed up. Your offerings, you can't get it mixed up, because this blood that's not put on the altar has to be the intention. The kohen has to be an intention that this is a sin offering and not the oil offering. Otherwise, it's not kosher. That's how much mindfulness there has to be in things that we do. That's why it repeats the word here. Chatasi, it is a sin offering. In other words, for the sake, for it to be kosher, it has to be with the intent that you're performing a sin offering, not that you're doing something else. Shaloi lishma psula, because if you did it for another thought, you were thinking that this is an oil offering, or this is a peace offering that you're bringing, or a holiday offering, it's invalid. You said, what's the difference? I mean, you brought it. That's how much intentional we have to be in our lives. It's so, just in our day and age, we're so unintentional. That's what's coming out over here. How intentional, how much we have to be so focused. Unbelievable. Oh boy. I'm talking to myself, not to you. I'm talking to myself.
Well, we hear it ourselves also.
Yeah, verse number 10, final verse for today. And the second one, Yaseh Oila, you should do it as an Oila Kimishpat, as its law, as its judgment, as law is. Right? Oila mean it's completely burnt on the altar. V'chipar olav, that's the gift, remember. From the metaphor of it going before the king, that's the gift that you bring afterwards. V'chipar olav, and he will become atoned for it, akayin, through the kayin, michatosei, from his sin, asher chata, that he sinned, v'nislach loi, and he will be forgiven. Rashi, kemishpat, as the judgment is. Kedasa amar ba'ila sa'iva shel nedavar, the same law that's regarding the voluntary oila offering of the fowl, which was the very beginning of our Torah portion in chapter 1. We're in chapter 5 now. That was in chapter 1. We already learned about that, right? When you bring an ascent offering that's voluntary, you can bring, this is you are obligated to bring, but you can bring an offering voluntary. You want to bring something, right, as a voluntary offering, not because I did something wrong, just, to connect to Hashem. So there we learn that the process and what you have to do, the whole thing is brought on the altar. Amazing. Whoa. Amazing. Thank you, folks. Okay, Tanya is coming.